Chapter 5. Fundamental Human Rights and Freedoms. Part 1 General. Article 12 Protection of Fundamental Human Rights and Freedoms. 1. The fundamental human rights and freedoms enshrined in this chapter shall be respected and upheld by the executive, legislature, and judiciary and all other organs of government and its agencies and, where applicable to them, by all natural and legal persons in Ghana, and shall be enforceable by the courts as provided for in this Constitution. 2. Every person in Ghana, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinion, color, religion, creed, or gender, shall be entitled to the fundamental human rights and freedoms of the individual contained in this chapter, but subject to respect for the rights and freedoms of others and for the public interest. Article 13 Protection of Right to Life. 1. No person shall be deprived of his life intentionally except in the exercise of the execution of a sentence of a court in respect of a criminal offense under the laws of Ghana of which he has been convicted. 2. A person shall not be held to have deprived another person of his life in contravention of Clause 1 of this article if that other person dies as a result of a lawful act of war, or if that other person dies as the result of the use of force to such an extent as is reasonably justifiable in the particular circumstances. A. For the defense of any person from violence or for the defense of property. Or B. In order to effect a lawful arrest or to prevent the escape of a person lawfully detained. Or C. For the purposes of suppressing a riot, insurrection, or mutiny. Or D. In order to prevent the commission of a crime by that person. Article 14 Protection of Personal Liberty. 1. Every person shall be entitled to his personal liberty, and no person shall be deprived of his personal liberty except in the following cases and in accordance with procedure permitted by law. A. In execution of a sentence or order of a court in respect of a criminal offense of which he has been convicted. Or B. In execution of an order of a court punishing him for contempt of court. Or C. For the purpose of bringing him before a court in execution of an order of a court. Or D. In the case of a person suffering from an infectious or contagious disease, a person of unsound mind, a person addicted to drugs or alcohol, or a vagrant, for the purpose of his care or treatment, or the protection of the community. Or E. For the purpose of the education or welfare of a person who has not attained the age of 18 years. Or F. For the purpose of preventing the unlawful entry of that person into Ghana, or of effecting the expulsion, extradition, or other lawful removal of that person from Ghana, or for the purpose of restricting that person while he is being lawfully conveyed through Ghana in the course of his extradition or removal from one country to another. Or G. Upon reasonable suspicion of his having committed or being about to commit a criminal offense under the laws of Ghana. 2. A person who is arrested, restricted, or detained shall be informed immediately in a language that he understands of the reason for his arrest, restriction, or detention, and of his right to a lawyer of his choice. 3. A person who is arrested, restricted, or detained. A. For the purpose of bringing him before a court in execution of an order of a court. Or B. Upon reasonable suspicion of his having committed or being about to commit a criminal offense under the laws of Ghana, and who is not released, shall be brought before a court within 48 hours after the arrest, restriction, or detention. 4. Where a person arrested, restricted, or detained under paragraph A or B of clause 3 of this article is not tried within a reasonable time, then, without prejudice to any further proceedings that may be brought against him, he shall be released either unconditionally or upon reasonable conditions, including, in particular, conditions reasonably necessary to ensure that he appears at a later date for trial or for proceeding preliminary to trial. 5. A person who is unlawfully arrested, restricted, or detained by any other person shall be entitled to compensation from that other person. 6. Where a person is convicted and sentenced to a term of imprisonment for an offense, any period he has spent in lawful custody in respect to that offense before the completion of his trial shall be taken into account in imposing the term of imprisonment. 7. Where a person who has served the whole or part of his sentence is acquitted on appeal by a court other than the Supreme Court, The court may certify to the Supreme Court that the person acquitted be paid compensation, and the Supreme Court may, upon examination of all the facts and the certificate of the court concerned, award such compensation as it may think fit, or, whether acquittal is by the Supreme Court, it may order compensation to be paid to the person acquitted. Article 15. Respect for human dignity. 1. The dignity of all persons shall be inviolable. 2. No person shall, whether or not he is arrested, restricted, or detained, be subjected to a. Torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. b. Any other condition that detracts or is likely to detract from his dignity and worth as a human. Being 3. A person who has not been convicted of a criminal offense shall not be treated as a convicted person, and shall be kept separately from convicted persons. 4. A juvenile offender who is kept in lawful custody or detention shall be kept separately from an adult offender. Article 16. Protection from slavery and forced labor. 1. No person shall be held in slavery or servitude. 2. No person shall be required to perform forced labor. 3. For the purposes of this article, forced labor does not include a. Any labor required as a result of a sentence or order of a court, or b. Any labor required of a member of a disciplined force of service as his duties, or, in the case of a person who has conscientious objections to a service as a member of the armed forces of Ghana, any labor which that person is required by law to perform in place of such service, or c. Any labor required during any period when Ghana is at war or in the event of an emergency or calamity that threatens the life and well-being of the community, to the extent that the requirement of such labor is reasonably justifiable in the circumstances of any situation arising or existing during that period for the purposes of dealing with the situation, or d. Any labor reasonably required as part of normal communal or other civic obligations. Article 17. Equality and freedom from discrimination. 1. All persons shall be equal before the law. 2. A person shall not be discriminated against on grounds of gender, race, color, ethnic origin, religion, creed, or social or economic status. 3. For the purposes of this article, discriminate means to give different treatment to different persons, attributable only or mainly to their respective descriptions by raw, place of origin, political opinions, color, gender, occupation, religion, or creed, whereby persons of one description are subjected to disabilities or restrictions to which persons of another description are not made subject or are granted privileges or advantages which are not granted to persons of another description. 4. Nothing in this article shall prevent Parliament from enacting laws that are reasonably necessary to provide a. For the implementation of policies and programs aimed at redressing social, economic, or educational imbalance in the Ghanaian society. b. For matters relating to adoption, marriage, divorce, burial, devolution of property on death, or other matters of personal law. c. For the imposition of restrictions on the acquisition of land by persons who are not citizens of Ghana or on the political and economic activities of such persons, and for other matters relating to such persons, or d. For making different provision for different communities having regard to their special circumstances, not being provision which is inconsistent with the spirit of this Constitution. 5. Nothing shall be taken to be inconsistent with this article which is allowed to be done under any provision of this chapter. Article 18. Protection of privacy of home and other property. 1. Every person has a right to own property either alone or in association with others. 2. No person shall be subjected to interference with the privacy of his home, property, correspondence, or communication except in accordance with law, and as may be necessary in a free and democratic society for public safety or the economic well-being of the country, for the protection of health or morals, for the prevention of disorder or crime, or for the protection of the rights or freedoms of others. Article 19. Fair trial. 1. A person charged with a criminal offense shall be given a fair hearing within a reasonable time by a court. 2. A person charged with a criminal offense shall a. In the case of an offense other than high treason or treason, the punishment for which is death, or imprisonment for life, be tried by a judge and jury and 1. Where the punishment is death, the verdict of the jury shall be unanimous. And 2. In the case of life imprisonment, the verdict of the jury shall be by such majority as Parliament may by law prescribe. B. In the case of an offense triable by a regional tribunal, the penalty for which is death, the decision of the chairman and the other panel members shall be unanimous. C. Be presumed to be innocent until he is proved or has pleaded guilty. D. Be informed immediately in a language that he understands, and in detail of the nature of the offense charge. E. Be given adequate time and facilities for the preparation of his defense. F. Be permitted to defend himself before the court in person or by a lawyer of his choice. G. Be afforded facilities to examine, in person or by his lawyer, the witnesses called by the prosecution before the court, and to obtain the attendance and carry out the examination of witnesses to testify on the same conditions as those applicable to witnesses called by the prosecution. H. Be permitted to have, without payment by him, the assistance of an interpreter where he cannot understand the language used of the trial, and 1. In the case of the offense of high treason or treason, be tried by the high court duly constituted, by 3 justices of that court, and the decision of the justices shall be unanimous. 3. The trial of a person charged with a criminal offense shall take place in his presence unless a. He refuses to appear before the court for the trial to be conducted in his presence after he has been duly notified of the trial, or b. He conducts himself in such a manner as to render the continuation of the proceedings in his presence impracticable, and the court orders him to be removed for the trial to proceed in his absence. 4. Whenever a person is tried for a criminal offense, the accused person, or a person authorized by him, shall, if he so requires, be given, within a reasonable time not exceeding 6 months after judgment, a copy of any record of the proceedings made by or on behalf of the court for the use of the accused person. 5. A person shall not be charged with or held to be guilty of a criminal offense which is founded on an act or omission that did not at the time it took place constitute an offense. 6. No penalty shall be imposed for a criminal offense that is severer in degree or description than the maximum penalty that could have been imposed for that offense at the time when it was committed. 7. No person who shows that he has been tried by a competent court for a criminal offense and either convicted or acquitted shall again be tried for that offense or for any other criminal offense of which he could have been convicted at the trial for the offense, except on the order of a superior court in the course of appeal or review proceedings relating to the conviction or acquittal. 8. Notwithstanding Clause 7 of this article, an acquittal of a person on a trial for high treason or treason shall not be a bar to the institution of proceeding for any other offense against that person. 9. Paragraphs A and B of Clause 2 of this article shall not apply in the case of a trial by a court-martial or other military tribunal. 10. No person who is tried for a criminal offense shall be compelled to give evidence at the trial. 11. No person shall be convicted of a criminal offense unless the offense is defined and the penalty for it is prescribed in a written law. 12. Clause 11 of this article shall not prevent a superior court from punishing a person for contempt of itself, notwithstanding that the act or omission constituting the contempt is not defined in a written law and the penalty is not so prescribed. 13. An adjudicating authority for the determination of the existence or extent of a civil right or obligation shall, subject to the provisions of this Constitution, be established by law and shall be independent and impartial, and where proceedings of determination are instituted by a person before such an adjudicating authority, the case shall be given a fair hearing within a reasonable time. 14. Except as may be otherwise ordered by the adjudicating authority in the interest of public morality, public safety, or public order, the proceedings of any such adjudicating authority shall be in public. 15. Nothing in this article shall prevent an adjudicating authority from excluding from the proceedings persons other than the parties of proceedings and their lawyers, to such an extent as the authority A. may consider necessary or expedient in circumstances where publicity would prejudice the interests of justice, or B. may be empowered by law to do in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, the welfare of persons under the age of 18 or the protection of the private lives of persons concerned in the proceedings. 16. Nothing in, or done under the authority of, any law shall be held to be inconsistent with, or in, contravention of, the following provisions. A. Paragraph C of Clause 2 of this article, to the extent that the law in question imposes upon a person charged with a criminal offense the burden of proving particular facts, or B. Clause 7 of this article, to the extent that the law in question authorizes a court to try a member of a disciplined force for a criminal offense notwithstanding any trial and conviction or acquittal of that member under the disciplinary law of the force, except that any court which tries that member and convicts him shall, in sentencing him to any punishment, take into account any punishment imposed on him under that disciplinary law. 17. Subject to Clause 18 of this article, treason shall consist only A. in levying war against Ghana or assisting any state or person, or inciting or conspiring with any person to levy war against Ghana, or B. in attempting by force of arms or other violent means to overthrow the organs of government established by or under this Constitution, or C. in taking part or being concerned in or inciting or conspiring with any person to make or take part or be concerned in any such attempt. 18. An act which aims at procuring by constitutional means an alteration of the law or the policies of the government shall not be considered as an act calculated to overthrow the organs of government. 19. Notwithstanding any other provision of this article, but subject to Clause 20 of this article, Parliament may, by or under an Act of Parliament, establish military courts or tribunals for the trial of offences against military law committed by persons subject to military law. 20. Where a person subject to military law, who is not in active service, commits an offence which is within the jurisdiction of a civil court, he shall not be tried by a court-martial or military tribunal for the offence unless the offence is within the jurisdiction of a court-martial or other military tribunal, under any law for the enforcement of military discipline. 21. For the purposes of this article, criminal offence means a criminal offence under the laws of Ghana. Article 20. Protection from deprivation of property. 1. No property of any description or interest in or right over any property shall be compulsorily taken, possession of or acquired by the state unless the following conditions are satisfied. A. The taking of possession or acquisition is necessary in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, public health, town and country planning, or the development or utilization of property in such a manner as to promote the public benefit, and B. The necessity for the acquisition is clearly stated, and is such as to provide reasonable justification for causing any hardship that may result to any person who has an interest in or right over the property. 2. Compulsory acquisition of property by the state shall only be made under a law which makes provision for A. The prompt payment of fair and adequate compensation, and B. A right of access to the High Court by any person who has an interest in or right over the property, whether direct or on appeal from any other authority for the determination of his interest or right in the amount of compensation to which he is entitled. 3. Where compulsory acquisition or possession of land affected by the state in accordance with Clause 1 of this article involves displacement of any inhabitants, the state shall resettle the displaced inhabitants on suitable alternative land with due regard for their economic well-being and social and cultural values. 4. Nothing in this article shall be construed as affecting the operation of any general law so far as it provides for the taking of possession or acquisition of property. A. By way of vesting or administration of trust property, enemy property, or the property of persons adjudged or otherwise declared bankrupt or insolvent, persons of unsound mind, deceased persons or bodies corporate or unincorporated in the course of being wound up, or B. in the execution of a judgment or order of a court, or C. by reason of its being in a dangerous state or injurious to the health of human beings, animals, or plants, or D. in consequence of any law with respect to delimitation of actions, or E. for so long only as may be necessary for the purpose of any examination, investigation, trial, or inquiry, or F. For so long as may be necessary for the carrying out of work on any land for the purpose of the provision of public facilities or utilities, except that where any damage results from any such work there shall be paid appropriate compensation. 5. Any property compulsorily taken possession of or acquired in the public interest or for public purpose shall be used only in the public interest or for the public purpose for which it was acquired. 6. Where the property is not used in the public interest or for the purpose for which it was acquired, the owner of the property immediately before the compulsory acquisition shall be given the first option for acquiring the property and shall, on such reacquisition, refund the whole or part of the compensation paid to him if provided for by law or such other amount as is commensurate with the value of the property at the time of the reacquisition. Article 21. General Fundamental Freedoms. 1. All persons shall have the right to a. Freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and other media. b. Freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, which shall include academic freedom. c. Freedom to practice any religion and to manifest such practice. d. Freedom of assembly, including freedom to take part in processions and demonstrations. e. Freedom of association, which shall include freedom to form or join trade unions or other associations, national and international, for the protection of their interest. F. Information, subject to such qualifications and laws as are necessary in a democratic society. G. Freedom of movement, which means a right to move freely in Ghana, the right to leave and to enter Ghana, and immunity from expulsion from Ghana. 2. A restriction on a person's freedom of movement by his lawful detention shall not be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this article. 3. All citizens shall have the right and freedom to form or join political parties and to participate in political activities subject to such qualifications and laws as are necessary in a free and democratic society and are consistent with this Constitution. 4. Nothing in or done under the authority of a law shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this article to the extent that the law in question makes provision a. for the imposition of restrictions by order of a court that are required in the interest of defense, public safety or public order, on the movement or residence within Ghana of any person, or b. for the imposition of restrictions by order of a court on the movement or residence within Ghana of any person either as a result of his having been found guilty of a criminal offense under the laws of Ghana or for the purposes of ensuring that he appears before a court at a later date for trial for a criminal offense or for proceedings relating to his extradition or lawful removal from Ghana, or for the imposition of restrictions that are reasonably required in the interests of defense, public safety, public health, or the running of essential services on the movement or residence within Ghana of any person or persons generally, or any class of persons, or c. for the imposition of restrictions that are reasonably required in the interest of defense, public safety, public health, or the running of essential services on the movement or residence within Ghana of any person or persons generally, or any class of persons, or d. for the imposition of restrictions on the freedom of entry into Ghana or of movement in Ghana of a person who is not a citizen of Ghana, or e. that is reasonably required for the purpose of safeguarding the people of Ghana against the teaching or propagation of a doctrine which exhibits or encourages disrespect for the nationhood of Ghana, the national symbols and emblems, or incites hatred against other members of the community, except so far as that provision, or, as the case may be, the thing done under the authority of that law is shown not to be reasonably justifiable in terms of the spirit of this Constitution. 5. Whenever a person whose freedom of movement has been restricted by the order of a court under paragraph A of clause 4 of this article requests at any time during the period of that restriction not earlier than 7 days after the order was made, or 3 months after he last made such request, as the case may be, his case shall be reviewed by that court. 6. On a review by a court under clause 5 of this article, the court may, subject to the right of appeal from its decision, make such order for the continuation or termination of the restriction as it considers necessary or expedient. Article 22. Property rights of spouses. 1. A spouse shall not be deprived of a reasonable provision out of the estate of a spouse whether or not the spouse died having made a will. 2. Parliament shall, as soon as practicable after the coming into force of this Constitution, enact legislation regulating the property rights of spouses. 3. With a view to achieving the full realization of the rights referred to in Clause 2 of this article. A. Spouses shall have equal access to property jointly acquired during marriage. B. Assets which are jointly acquired during marriage shall be distributed equitably between the spouses upon dissolution of the marriage. Article 23. Administrative Justice. Administrative bodies and administrative officials shall act fairly and reasonably and comply with the requirements imposed on them by law and persons aggrieved by the exercise of such acts, and decisions shall have the right to seek redress before a court or other tribunal. Article 24. Economic Rights. 1. Every person has a right to work under satisfactory, safe, and healthy conditions, and shall receive equal pay for equal work without distinction of any kind. 2. Every worker shall be assured of rest, leisure, and reasonable limitation of working hours and periods, of holidays with pay, as well as remuneration for public holidays. 3. Every worker has a right to form or join a trade union of his choice for the promotion and protection of his economic and social interests. 4. Restrictions shall not be placed on the exercise of the right conferred by Clause 3 of this article, except restrictions prescribed by law and reasonably necessary in the interest of national security or public order or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. Article 25. Educational Rights. 1. All persons shall have a right to equal educational opportunities and facilities, and with a view to achieving the full realization of that right. A. Basic education shall be free, compulsory, and available to all. B. Secondary education in its different forms, including technical and vocational education, shall be made generally available and accessible to all by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive introduction of free education. C. Higher education shall be made equally accessible to all on the basis of capacity by every appropriate means, and in particular by progressive introduction of free education. D. Functional literacy shall be encouraged or intensified as far as possible. E. The development of a system of schools with adequate facilities at all levels shall be actively pursued. 2. Every person shall have the right, at his own expense, to establish and maintain a private school or schools at all levels and of such categories and in accordance with such conditions as may be provided by law. Article 26. Cultural Rights and Practices. 1. Every person is entitled to enjoy, practice, profess, maintain, and promote any culture, language, tradition, or religion subject to the provisions of this Constitution. 2. All customary practices which dehumanize or are injurious to the physical and mental well-being of a person are prohibited. Article 27. Women's Rights. 1. Special care shall be accorded to mothers during a reasonable period before and after childbirth, and during those periods, working mothers shall be accorded paid leave. 2. Facilities shall be provided for the care of children below school-going age to enable women who have the traditional care for children realize their full potential. 3. Women shall be guaranteed equal rights to training and promotion without any impediments from any person. Article 28. Children's Rights. 1. Parliament shall enact such laws as are necessary to ensure that A. Every child has a right to the same measure of special care, assistance, and maintenance as is necessary for its development from its natural parents, except where those parents have effectively surrendered their rights and responsibilities in respect to the child in accordance with law. B. Every child, whether or not born in wedlock, shall be entitled to reasonable provision out of the estate of its parents. C. Parents undertake their natural right and obligation of care, maintenance, and upbringing of their children in cooperation with such institutions as Parliament may by law prescribe in such manner that in all cases the interests of the children are paramount. D. Children and young persons receive special protection against exposure to physical and moral hazards. And E. The protection and advancement of the family as a unit of society are safeguarded in promotion of the interests of children. 2. Every child has a right to be protected from engaging in work that constitutes a threat to his health, education, or development. 3. A child shall not be subjected to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. 4. No child shall be deprived by any other person of medical treatment, education, or any other social or economic benefit by reason only of religious or other beliefs. 5. For the purposes of this article, child means a person below the age of 18 years. Article 29 Rights of Disabled Persons. 1. Disabled persons have the right to live with their families or with foster parents and to participate in social, creative, or recreational activities. 2. A disabled person shall not be subjected to differential treatment in respect of his residence other than that required by his condition or by the improvement which he may derive from the treatment. 3. If the stay of a disabled person in a specialized establishment is indispensable, the environment and living conditions there shall be as close as possible to those of the normal life of a person of his age. 4. Disabled persons shall be protected against all exploitation, all regulations, and all treatment of a discriminatory, abusive, or degrading nature. 5. In any judicial proceedings which a disabled person is a party, the legal procedure applied shall take his physical and mental condition into account. 6. As far as practicable, every place to which the public has access shall have appropriate facilities for disabled persons. 7. Special incentives shall be given to disabled persons engaged in business and also to business organizations that employ disabled persons in significant numbers. 8. Parliament shall enact such laws as are necessary to ensure the enforcement of the provisions of this Article 30 Rights of the Sick. A person who by reason of sickness or any other cause is unable to give his consent shall not be deprived by any other person of medical treatment, education, or any other social or economic benefit, by reason only of religious or other beliefs. Skips Articles 31 and 32. Article 33 Protection of Rights by the Courts. 1. Where a person alleges that a provision of this Constitution on the fundamental human rights and freedoms has been, or is likely to be contravened in relation to him, then, without prejudice to any other action that is lawfully available, that person may apply to the High Court for redress. 2. The High Court may, under Clause 1 of this article, issue such directions, orders, or writs including writs or orders in the nature of habeas corpus, certiorari, mandamus, prohibition, and quo warranto, as it may consider appropriate for the purposes of enforcing or securing the enforcement of any of the provisions on the fundamental human rights and freedoms to the protection of which the person concerned is entitled. 3. A person aggrieved by a determination of the High Court may appeal to the Court of Appeal with the right of a further appeal to the Supreme Court. 4. The Rules of Court Committee may make rules of court with respect to the practice and procedure of the superior courts for the purposes of this article. 5. The rights, duties, declarations, and guarantees relating to the fundamental human rights and freedoms specifically mentioned in this chapter shall not be regarded as excluding others not specifically mentioned, which are considered to be inherent in a democracy and intended to secure the freedom and dignity of man.